sort of the beginning of dialectometry. And it's very sensible and very well done. And for you and me, of course, when we think about the amount of work, we have some notion of the amount of work that goes into making correlation coefficients between every two sites in any kind of a study. And all of that had to be done by hand, right? Your typewriter wouldn't do it for you in those days. All right, so dialectal similarities, he says, grow much clearer when viewed as quantitative rather than qualitative phenomena. So there again, the guy who was well ahead of his time, and one of Shibata's mates in that respect, kindred spirits. Here is Takashi Shibata in a photo that was given to me several years ago, 2001 or 2006, I think, by Masao Aizawa. And this photograph of Shibata, this is very much the way I remember him, so I assume this is from sometime in the 1980s, which is when I first met him. And so here he is looking like a man on his way to work, and he often was. And here's some of the things that Professor Shibata left behind in his various writings. He said, by comparing linguistic differences to members of a community and explaining the exterior social conditions which cause linguistic differences among the members, we may finally infer the direction and type of future linguistic changes. And that is very much in the spirit of sociolinguistic inquiry. He also said, in language life, which is the translation of Gengo Saikatsu, in language life research, we start with the assumption that speech differs according to the individual and the situation, and then look for similarities and common features. This is why language life research so often makes use of statistical tools. Again, very much in the spirit of the sociolinguistic enterprise that is so familiar to all of us. And these comments were made years earlier. Incidentally, if it had happened that Takashi Shibata had founded an international movement, the international movement would probably not have been called sociolinguistics, it would have been called Gengo Saikatsu, because that's what he thought of it as. But it didn't work that way. Right. So the translators diligently translate Gengo Saikatsu in his book, as we'll see in a minute, as language life. You could substitute sociolinguistics and you wouldn't go far wrong. All right, just a few comments about who he was and how he got there. There are people in this room who knew him very well. Fumio was sitting right in front of me, especially, but others as well. He was born in Nagoya City in 1942 at Tokyo University. He studied what seems to be a general sort of language program. It included romanization, so alphabet writing system studies as well. He became an assistant professor at Tokyo University in 1945, and the people who translated his works are convinced that the crucial piece of work in Takashi Shibata's early life was this literacy survey where he worked with statisticians, and that survey was funded by U.S. occupation forces, and it was intended to show that the low level of literacy in Japan was the reason that there had been hostilities with Japan and other nations. And what the results were is that Japan was strikingly literate, highly literate. It was published in 1949, but this experience of doing a huge monster-scale survey that involves statisticians seems to have been the imprint for much of Shibata's work to come. In 1949, he joined the newly formed Language Research Institute. It was already in existence. I at first, for many years, I thought that he founded it, but he did not. And in fact, in Asahi-san's talk yesterday, he mentioned a couple of the forebears of Shibata in the Institute. But what Shibata did when he joined the Institute was he directed some huge projects on standardization, on dialects, honorifics effectively on dialectometry, the application of statistics to dialect differences. And many of those projects still live today. And so what we're going to hear at this conference, we're going to hear Kenjiro Matsuda. He's going to talk about honorifics, a study that is going on today and goes back to Shibata's time. So, and later there's a poster at some point with Ichiro Ota and Shijo Takana and some other authors too, which also goes back in distance. And those of you who don't have any acquaintance with my textbook will know there's a large study of Soroka, the language changes in a Japanese city that has been studied time and time again, and the National Institute has just made yet another panel survey of that region. So these huge projects that are gems, masterworks of sociolinguistic research, of real-time and apparent time sociolinguistic research, they all have the thumbprint of Takashi Shibata on them. In 1964, he left the institute and went to Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. Fumio succeeded him, I think. And he was the chair of linguistics at Tokyo University as well. And then after he retired, he did what many Japanese professors do. He went to a private university, I think that's what it is, and founded a linguistics department there. And I just want to, because this is a kind of westernization, a western view of Takashi Shibata, the only kind I can give, I'm afraid, I just want to mention a few international landmarks which will come up again. He attended methods conferences in Canada at least on 3 occasions, and that's where I was fortunate enough to meet him briefly, as we'll see at the end, very end. In 1992, he was awarded the Distinguished Scholar Award by the American Dialect Society. I'm going to show you that. And there was a special issue of American Speech, came out in 1996. In 1999, the jewel of scholarship for Takashi Shibata's work is called Sociolinguistics in Japanese Context. I'm going to talk about that in some detail as well. So these are international landmarks. These are the ways his reputation was spreading. Notice that this was after his retirement, punitive retirement, that a lot of the Western attention came to him. All right, here's the American Dialect Society special issue for him. It came out in 1996. It just took 4 years after they gave him the award for him to get the book out. That's normal, I guess, right? Everybody said, oh, okay. Yeah. And Michael Lynn wrote the introduction to that, and it was partly through Michael Lynn, as I understand it, and I think Jiro Nagase, that this attention was drawn to Shibata in the American Dialect Society. And Mike Lynn says that this was the first and as yet only time that the American Dialect Society has presented the award to a dialectologist whose primary work was not concerned with the analysis of English. So an enormous honor, I think, and of course well-deserved. The book contains a selected bibliography, the selected bibliography, and I was pleased when I pulled out the book, of course, the journal, and I was pleased to remember that Mike Lynn had quoted me in the introduction. He says the published bibliography of the work extends over 50 pages. He's explaining why it's a selected bibliography, and then he says, Professor Shibata's work fills a good-sized room. So I'm pleased to recall that by that point, I was well aware of Professor Shibata by the time this special issue came about. And you'll notice that the contributors to the special edition include some of Professor Shibata's disciples, and Fumio, in a way, he uses the term students and grand students, which I think is a wonderful expression. The people who had real actual contact with Shibata, and the people who learned from the people who he taught. Right? So Fumio's students as well as Fumio himself. And so you can see some of the names there, Danny Long and Jiro Nagase and Fumio and Yoshio Nase, all contributes in this special issue. And the names come up again, and so does the bibliography issue come up again immediately here in 1999. Actually, the copyright page of this book says 1998, but the face page says 1999, so I don't know how it's categorized. Anyway, sociolinguistics in Japanese context, you can see Takashi Shibata is in the title of the book. It is a collection of his works. And it was a labor of love for these students and grand students. The dedication page says exactly this. We dedicate this book to the greatest sociolinguist of Japan, Dr. Takashi Shibata. And then it's signed by the 9 translators of his works in that book. So, and there they are listed there, and we're going to hear the names of a few more as I go on. Today, a few of those people will come up, and whether they want to or not. It has 24 chapters by Shibata, so a selection of his works, presumably the works that the editors considered to be the very best of his works. And it has introductions by Kunihiro Inoue and Danny Long, are 2 of them or 3 of them for each piece. It has a full bibliography, the complete bibliography, the bibliography that was said to fill a room. It doesn't quite. 9 translators and 489 pages, and it is readily available in almost every library in the world, published by Muton, as you can see here, and a wonderful tribute and a tremendous amount of labor and work for these people. And all of the things that I've been talking about today, not all of them actually, but the things I've talked about so far are all in this book, and I just want you to know that my debt to this book is enormous. I couldn't be up here talking about these things if this book didn't exist. So it's a wonderful piece of work and a real accomplishment. Okay, I'm going to move on to another concept, another linguistic notion, another linguistic observation of Takashi Shibata, and it's called Geigo Keisei. And what that translates as is the language forming period. And this I'm particularly proud of, and in fact, Yoshiyuki mentioned in the beginning in the introduction, he mentioned that he read my paper when he was at Essex on dialect acquisition, and that he found in that paper a reference to Takashi Shibata, which impressed him. And now, I must say, looking back at the time, I didn't think about it much, but it impresses me too, because as far as I know, I think it's the first reference to Shibata's work beyond Japan, maybe. And this all came out, I'm going to give it a context, I'm going to point out how it all came to be, that my work, my research, my current research intersected with research that had been done by Takashi Shibata some time earlier. This was the dialect acquisition study that Yoshiyuki mentioned. It published in 1992 in language. And what I did was I looked at 2 Canadian families that had moved to southeast England, and I tape recorded them at intervals. And I tried to discover how the children in those families go about losing their Canadian accent, that is, sounding like me, and acquire English accents, that is, they end up sounding not like me. So that's the gist of the study. And I'm just going to give you a few examples now so I can show you that I was in a kind of a quandary when I was putting this research together, and Takashi Shibata came to the rescue. So here's the simplest kind of change, right? So you look at